Right now, at this exact moment, Elon Musk is doing something no billionaire has ever dared to do before. Surprised? He's deleting an entire continent from the internet, not threatening to do it, not negotiating about it, actually doing it. 340 million European accounts are vanishing from X in real time. Starlink satellites are going dark across 27 countries. And Ursula von der Leyen, the woman who thought she could control the richest man on earth with a 20 million euro fine, is watching her entire regulatory empire collapse in absolute panic, shouting, "This isn't a corporate dispute anymore. This is war, and Europe is losing catastrophically." What you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about who actually controls the digital world we all live in. Because the European Union just learned the most expensive lesson in modern history. You cannot threaten a man who owns the infrastructure itself. The crisis began exactly 73 days ago when Ursula von der Leyen made the decision that would destroy her legacy forever. She sat in her Brussels office on the 14th floor of the Berlaymont building, surrounded by her most trusted advisors, reviewing what they were calling Operation Digital Sovereignty. The plan was perfect, elegant, unstoppable, or so they believed. The European Commission had spent 22 months building an airtight legal case against Elon Musk and his platform, X. They had documented 847 specific violations of the Digital Services Act. They had collected testimony from 312 researchers who claimed Musk had blocked their access to platform data. They had compiled evidence of what they called systematic disinformation that was poisoning European democracy from the inside. The evidence filled 2,400 pages of legal documentation. Every single page had been reviewed by the EU's top legal minds. Every argument had been stress tested against potential challenges. Every claim had been verified and cross-referenced multiple times. This wasn't a rushed political attack. This was a comprehensive legal siege designed to bring Elon Musk to his knees and force him to surrender control of his platform to European regulators. The punishment structure was carefully calibrated to be absolutely devastating. First, an immediate fine of 20 million euros for deceptive practices related to the blue verification checkmark system. Then, formal charges that X had become what Brussels called a breeding ground for dangerous disinformation. Next, accusations that Musk had deliberately violated European law by refusing to provide data access to independent researchers. And finally, the ultimate weapon that would force complete surrender, X would be banned from every single app store across all 27 European Union member states unless Musk agreed to one non-negotiable demand. He had to install EU-approved content moderators directly inside X's headquarters in San Francisco. These weren't going to be advisors. These weren't going to be consultants who made suggestions Musk could ignore. These were going to be officials with actual enforcement power. They would have the authority to remove any content they deemed harmful to European interests. They would have the power to suspend any account they considered dangerous. They would have the ability to control what 340 million Europeans were allowed to see, read, share, and say on the platform. Essentially, Brussels was demanding that Musk hand over the keys to free speech on X and let European bureaucrats decide what qualified as acceptable communication. Von der Leyen had absolute confidence this would work. She had done this exact thing before with every other American tech giant. She had brought Apple to its knees over App Store monopoly policies, forcing them to completely restructure their entire ecosystem. She had made Google pay $8.2 billion in antitrust fines and fundamentally change how it operated across Europe. She had forced Meta to dismantle its data collection infrastructure and rebuild it according to EU specifications. Every single time, the pattern was identical. First, the tech companies resisted. They complained about regulatory overreach. They threatened to reduce their European operations. They made angry statements about government interference in free markets. Then, after months of posturing, they always came back to the negotiating table because leaving Europe was impossible. The European Union represented 450 million of the wealthiest consumers on planet Earth. The purchasing power was enormous. The revenue potential was staggering. No technology company could afford to abandon that market. The financial loss would be catastrophic. The competitive disadvantage would be permanent. So they always surrendered eventually. They always paid the fines. They always accepted the restrictions. They always found a way to comply. Von der Leyen had mapped out exactly how the Musk negotiation would unfold. Phase 1, Musk would explode on social media with posts about tyranny and censorship and attacks on freedom. Phase 2, his lawyers would request formal meetings to discuss the specific allegations and potential remedies. Phase 3, there would be 6 to 9 months of back-and-forth negotiations about the fine amount and the exact authority the EU moderators would have. Phase 4, Musk would agree to a modified version of the demands, declare victory by claiming he had protected free speech while making minimal concessions, and everything would continue operating normally. This was how it always worked. This was how it had worked with Tim Cook at Apple. This was how it had worked with Sundar Pichai at Google. This was how it had worked with Mark Zuckerberg at Meta. Von der Leyen had absolutely no reason to believe Elon Musk would be any different. But Musk was different. Fundamentally, structurally, dangerously different in ways that Brussels completely failed to understand. Normal CEOs operated within constraints that Musk had systematically eliminated from his life. Normal CEOs had boards of directors who could overrule their decisions if those decisions threatened shareholder value. Normal CEOs had investors who demanded quarterly profit growth above everything else. Normal CEOs had financial partners who would revolt if the company sacrificed billions in revenue for abstract principles about freedom and government control. Musk had none of those limitations. He owned X completely and outright. He had purchased the entire company with $44 billion of his own money. He had no board that could fire him. He had no shareholders who could sue him for destroying company value. He had no investors who could threaten to pull their funding if he made decisions they disagreed with. He could do exactly what he wanted, when he wanted, for whatever reason he wanted. And what he wanted was something that von der Leyen never even considered possible. He wanted to prove that European regulatory power was built on nothing but illusion and bluff. He wanted to demonstrate that the EU's authority only existed because tech companies voluntarily chose to recognize it. He wanted to show the entire world that threatening Elon Musk was the biggest mistake any government could make. So when the European Commission issued its final ultimatum on December 3rd, 2025, demanding that Musk comply with all their terms within 30 days or face an immediate and total ban across every European country, something completely unprecedented happened. Silence. Absolute, total, unnerving silence that stretched for weeks and created confusion that slowly transformed into genuine fear inside the Berlaymont building. For 19 days, Musk said absolutely nothing publicly about the EU's demands. No tweets, no statements, no press releases, no interviews, no angry posts about government overreach, no complaints about censorship, no threats about leaving Europe, nothing. It was as if he had simply decided that the European Union no longer existed in his world. His legal team in Europe went completely dark. They stopped responding to emails from EU officials. They stopped attending scheduled compliance meetings. They stopped filing the procedural documents that European law explicitly required them to submit. They vanished from every official channel of communication inside Brussels. This silence created growing panic among officials who had expected the usual pattern of resistance followed by negotiation. Some commissioners believed Musk was preparing a massive legal counterattack with armies of lawyers ready to challenge the EU in every court across the continent. Others thought he was stalling for time while his technical team searched for loopholes in European regulations that would allow him to continue operating without actually complying. A few officials, the ones who had actually studied Musk's history of confronting governments and regulators, began to suspect that something else was happening, something they hadn't planned for, something they hadn't even considered remotely possible. They were right to worry because while Brussels waited for Musk to respond through normal diplomatic and legal channels, he was doing something far more radical than anyone in the European Commission had imagined in their worst nightmares. He wasn't preparing to negotiate. He wasn't preparing to fight in European courts. He was preparing to leave Europe entirely and permanently in a way that would make reversal completely impossible. On December 8th, 2025, at exactly 3:17 a.m. California time, Musk sent an encrypted message to exactly 14 people. His core engineering leadership team at X, his head of legal affairs, his chief financial officer, and 4 trusted advisors who had been with him since the PayPal days in the late 1990s when he first learned how to fight institutional power. The message contained exactly 3 words: execute protocol severance. Every single person who received that message knew exactly what it meant. They had been preparing for this scenario in absolute secrecy for 7 months. They had mapped out every technical step required. They had calculated every financial consequence down to the exact dollar amount. They had war-gamed every possible response from European governments and regulatory bodies. Protocol severance was the internal code name for something that had never been done before in the history of the internet, a complete and total withdrawal of a major technology platform from the European Union. Not a temporary shutdown that could be reversed if negotiations improved. Not a negotiating tactic designed to scare Brussels into backing down from their demands. Not a threat meant to bring European officials back to the bargaining table with better terms. A full, permanent, irreversible exit from the entire European continent. Every single European user account would be systematically archived and then deleted permanently. Every server located in European data centers would be physically removed and destroyed to prevent any possibility of data recovery by EU authorities. Every business relationship with European advertising partners would be immediately terminated with no exceptions. Every contract with European content creators would be voided. X would cease to exist on European soil as completely as if the platform had never been created. The engineering team moved with absolute military precision. They divided themselves into 3 specialized operational groups, each with a specific mission that had to be executed flawlessly. The first group handled the technical deletion process. They were writing code that would systematically erase every piece of data associated with European users while preserving the global platform's functionality for users in the rest of the world. This was extraordinarily complex work that required brilliant engineering. X's infrastructure was deeply interconnected across continents. European user data was entangled with global systems in thousands of ways. Deleting 340 million accounts without crashing the entire platform for users in America, Asia, Africa, and everywhere else required surgical precision that most engineers said was impossible. The team worked in brutal 18-hour shifts, testing and retesting their deletion protocols on isolated server environments. The second group managed financial logistics and legal separation. They had to unwind 4,784 individual advertising contracts with European companies. They had to settle outstanding payment obligations. They had to calculate the exact revenue loss from abandoning the European market completely. The numbers were absolutely staggering. X generated approximately $4.7 billion annually from European operations. That revenue would vanish overnight. European advertisers paid premium rates. European users were highly engaged. European markets were incredibly valuable. But Musk had made his decision absolutely clear to everyone involved. The money didn't matter. The principle mattered. Proving that EU authority was an illusion mattered more than billions in annual revenue. The third group was the smallest, but perhaps the most critical to the entire operation. They handled what Musk personally called narrative control. This team would manage how the world understood what was happening. They would craft the messaging. They would time the announcements for maximum global impact. They would control the story before traditional media could frame it their way. Musk had learned something crucial from his years of battling governments, regulators, and media organizations across multiple continents. The side that controls the narrative wins the war. It didn't matter what the actual law said. It didn't matter what regulators claimed their authority allowed them to do. What mattered was what hundreds of millions of people believed was true about who was right and who was wrong. And Musk knew exactly how to make people believe his version of events. He would frame the EU as authoritarian censors trying to control free speech. He would position himself as the lone defender of digital freedom, fighting against government overreach. He would make every European user feel like Brussels had personally taken something precious away from them. And he would make absolutely certain they blamed the European Union, not him. On January 2nd, 2026, at exactly 6 a.m. Brussels time, the announcement dropped like a bomb. Musk didn't use traditional press releases. He didn't go through corporate communications departments. He didn't have his lawyers draft carefully worded legal statements designed to minimize liability. He posted directly to X. His words were chosen with absolute precision to create maximum emotional impact and immediate global reaction. The message was simple, direct, and absolutely devastating. Effective immediately, X will cease all operations in the European Union. This is not a negotiation. This is not a threat. This is a final decision. Brussels has demanded that I surrender control of free speech on this platform to EU bureaucrats who will decide what 340 million Europeans are allowed to say and read. I will not do this. Brussels has demanded that I install government-approved moderators inside my company who will censor content according to political preferences. I will not do this. Brussels has demanded that I transform X into a tool of state-approved information control. I will not do this. So X leaves Europe entirely. Every account will be deleted permanently. Every connection will be severed. The European Union has made its choice. Now they will live with the consequences. The message detonated across the internet like a digital nuclear explosion. Within 4 minutes, it had been viewed 52 million times. Within an hour, it was the #1 trending topic in every country on Earth. Within 3 hours, it had been shared more than any post in the entire history of social media. European users began panicking immediately. Journalists who had built entire careers on X suddenly faced professional extinction. Politicians who communicated directly with millions of followers scrambled desperately to download their data before it vanished forever. The European Commission was completely blindsided. They had prepared response strategies for every scenario they could imagine: legal challenges, fine negotiations, public complaints. They had not prepared for this. They had not prepared for Musk to simply walk away and delete everything. But X was just the beginning, because while von der Leyen held emergency meetings with panicked EU leaders, Musk was already executing phase 2 of protocol severance. Starlink, the satellite network that had become critical infrastructure for millions of Europeans, was about to go completely dark. Rural hospitals depending on satellite internet would lose connectivity. Farms using precision agriculture would go offline. Remote schools would lose their only connection to the digital world. And when those satellites stopped working, Europe would face something far worse than losing a social media platform. They would face total digital collapse in regions that had no alternatives. The crisis was about to get infinitely worse. Make sure you're subscribed, because the next video reveals exactly what happened when Starlink shut down and European governments realized they had no power to stop it. Drop a comment telling me if you think Musk went too far or if the EU deserved this for trying to control free speech. Hit that like button if you want more content exposing the real power struggles happening behind the scenes right now.